Hello and welcome to another video. Today we're doing a little knit and chat about knitting and its relationship to mental health. Hello and welcome back. So I wanted to sit down today and do a little knit and chat about the relationship, at least for me, between knitting and my mental health, and how they kind of impact each other. And so that's what we're doing. I'm gonna knit on my Moonset Tee by Ozetta. So far I am, which I'm knitting out of this beautiful, it's an alpaca linen silk yarn by Salty Blonde Fibers. It was her summer blend in the color Mojito. So I'm gonna knit on that while we talk. I've done the professional little podcaster thing and I have a progress keeper. So here's my cute little progress keeper and we will see how far I get while we chat. I've been thinking about doing this video for quite a while. At least a month ago, I saw this post from someone that I'm not going to be able to find now since it was a month ago, but they were essentially saying that they hate the term knitting as therapy. And I've seen this term a lot. A lot of people will use it to kind of talk about how calming knitting is, and I definitely understand why people say knitting is therapy. It feels therapeutic at times when you're really stressed out and just being able to kind of sit down and focus on something, use your hands. But this person was saying, and a lot of the comments as well that agreed were just saying that it was kind of dismissive of actual therapy, and that oftentimes knitting can be stressful for some people if you're trying to finish projects, or it's not as simple as knitting as therapy, and it's definitely not a replacement for like actual talk therapy. But at the same time, I think that knitting is a really great coping skill. And so I've been thinking a lot about that term and thinking about my own relationship between my knitting and mental health. And so I kind of wanted to sit down and talk about it today. So for me, a little bit of my background, I have various anxiety problems, disorders, whatever you want to call them. I'm not going to go into a lot of specifics, but I've always been a little bit anxious. I'm definitely stressed girly. And I also have always kind of struggled with paying attention to one thing. Like, I'm the kind of person that if I'm watching TV without knitting or something in front of me, I'm not watching it very well. And so I've struggled with that aspect. And I'm just anxious. I'm a lot better than I used to be, but I used to be really quite an anxious person, worried about like the parking situation wherever I was going to go. Like, I wouldn't go to new things if I didn't know, like, is there going to be a place to park my car? Am I going to have to parallel park? Like, I didn't want to drive new places. I've always had a lot of driving anxiety, and just a lot of anticipation anxiety too, like getting stressed about things that even if I was excited about them, like just the anxiety leading up to something would be so big that it would make it really hard for me to engage in it. Hi, I'm editing this now and did want to come back in and add a little bit more about myself. I think that something essential that I kind of missed when I was talking about my own anxiety and my own mental health is that I'm kind of a chronic overthinker. And so I struggle with anxiety in the typical sense that you see of physically, being anxious, shaking, all that, but also just something that impacts me a lot more now is that overthinking element. And that's a lot of why I can't just watch a TV show without something else to do. I really struggle with just turning my brain off and not overthinking about, did I say something silly in this conversation? Am I actually doing good at my job? What did this person mean when they said this? And just that kind of overthinking element. So I wanted to add that in to say, that's a lot of where this comes in. And that's when I'm referencing I can't pay attention to a TV show. It's more about because I'm overthinking and because I can't just turn my brain off, rather than, just not being able to have focus or an attention span. It's more of that if something's not attention grabbing enough, my brain is overthinking. And so wanted to add that context in. It's kind of a fine line of how much I want to say about my own history online versus like be real and talk about what I've experienced. But I will just say, had anxiety. And then on top of that, there's been the struggling to pay attention, and just kind of feeling restless. And I've always in the past felt I've struggled to rest. Um, I've always had a sense that like, and I think this is less of a mental health thing and more of a just the society that we've grown up in thing, but sitting and watching TV or just sitting and doing something not quote unquote productive felt bad to me. Like I used to just, if I didn't do something in a day or leave the house in a day, I'd feel just immediately wrong and gross and just feel bad about myself. But with knitting, I've kind of gotten over that, and allowing myself to do something productive while I'm at home and resting. So just always struggled to rest before. And so, yeah, those are some of my own experience with mental health. And again, like I could go further into that, but I also want to be aware of, how much I'm saying. So I'm going to leave it at that and just kind of dwell more on what knitting has done for me within that. And so I want to talk about how I started knitting 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, right when I graduated college, which it's still crazy to me that I've been out of college for that long. That kind of freaks me out. But yeah, I started knitting right after I graduated college and was working my job for the first, like a full-time job, which I'd had for a really long time, but without school, that was kind of my only thing going on. And at the time, I was just struggling a lot with work-life balance and boundaries and feeling kind of anxious about what was next. And I realized how much I'd relied on school and working full time to kind of fill up my time and be busy. Like I've always been a very introverted person, and never like wanted to go out every night or have a million friends. And in the past, I'd always kind of wanted to justify that and say, well, I'm busy. Like even in high school, I worked 20 plus hours a week and I didn't need the income from that. Like I didn't spend a lot of money, and my parents have always been nice and paid for me to stay alive as a child. So I didn't need the money to work that much. It was just that I wanted to be busy, and I've always kind of been that way of wanting, like even as a kid, I've always wanted to be busy. And as I got older, I was using being busy as a way to distract from the fact that I have good friends. I love the friends in my life. I have a very good social circle for me, but it's a very small social circle. And that used to just make me feel insufficient. Like on TV, you see these huge friend groups, you see people going out together every weekend, you see people just doing things together like grocery shopping and like always spending time with friends. And I just have never been one of those people. Like I'd rather go to the store alone or do a lot of things alone or just not do things. Like I don't want to go out. I don't want to go to dinner every night. Like that's just not me. And that's fine. But yeah, before I started knitting, I would just use being busy as kind of a reason for that instead of just saying it's not for me. And through knitting, I think part of it is also just getting older too and becoming more comfortable with myself. But I think knitting has played a huge part in that, and like just accepting more of who I am and finding a community that is very similar to me, and really being able to fully accept that I am not the extroverted person that has a huge friend group. I'm not the person that's going to go out and do a million things every night. And that's also completely fine. Like, that's a very valid way to exist. That's the way a lot of people live and exist. And seeing other people who are like that, and the fact through the knitting community, and the fact that like I would rather stay home and watch a nice TV show and knit on a Friday night than go out, like the majority of the time. Sometimes, I want to go to a Hosier concert or do something really fun like that and go out and do things. Both are completely valid, but just it's given me something that I'd rather do a lot of the time, and that in turn has really built my confidence in my own choices, in my own personality, in my own friend groups, and in turn has just made me feel more secure in myself and more confident overall. Not just about, how many friends I have or what I'm doing every night, how I'm spending my time, but just in the broader sense of like, I just feel more confident and at peace with myself, through, honestly, part of it's getting older and, my frontal lobe developing more, but also through knitting and having a community and having something that I really care about doing and that brings me a lot of joy, just has set me to a calmer level. And I think that's true for most hobbies of, when you find something you really enjoy and you can see yourself getting better at something, it just makes you more confident in other aspects of your life. One of my really good friends just started pottery, and I can see that in her too. In the past, like she's kind of opposite of me in a lot of ways and is a very extroverted friend, but seeing her start pottery and get better at something and just really enjoy doing something with her hands, it's really cool to see how just having a hobby where you get to make something in this productive way and is kind of a solo experience for you just builds your confidence in other ways and makes you feel calmer. Like I just feel calmer with knitting in my life. And I agree that it is not a replacement for therapy. I do also see a therapist, but oh man, it knitting has talked me out of many a panic attack or brought me down from many a panic attack or many a bad mood. And I'm so grateful to it for that. Like I just like a few years ago, the work I do, I travel to a lot of countries, and sometimes traveling to those countries is not always safe. So I, at my old job, had to go through this hostile environment training, and it's basically it was crazy. Basically, I flew out to DC and was there for 3 days doing this training where we were in a warehouse, and they'd set up the warehouse to look like a market in a developing country. And so there was lots of little stalls and kind of winding areas and then kind of bigger areas as well. And they, for 3 days, put us in situations and scenarios. So there was, someone trying to rob you at gunpoint. There was someone passed out that you had to firemen carry out of an area, trying to show you how to put on a tourniquet, trying to show you how to pack a wound and treat a gunshot before you can get to a hospital, how to stay calm. But they also teach you self-defense and then put you in like a mob situation, a shooting situation. And it was very scary for me, as someone with anxiety. It was horrible. I'm grateful I did it. I think that it's really important, and I honestly think that if you can go to one of those trainings, even if you're not planning on traveling to developing countries, it's really worth doing because it talks about school shootings or just things that you may encounter just in your day-to-day life. Car crashes, like our last scenario was dealing with a car crash, and that is probably just as, if not more, likely to happen right by me than it is to happen when I'm traveling. And so I highly recommend doing something like that. But that whole scenario just gave me a lot of anxiety. For like 3 days, I could hardly eat, and I had like a few panic attacks while doing this training because it was just so intense, like going into these scenarios where you don't know what's going to happen on purpose, but you know that something bad is going to happen. And, trying to remember how to treat gunshot wounds and just anxiety inducing. But I brought my knitting with me when I was doing this all, and it was just such a peace of mind activity. There was one day specifically where during the shooting training, or the shooting scenario, I had to leave. I could not do it. I started having a panic attack, and so I was put in a room alone. And I'd brought my knitting with me that day, just knowing that I was probably going to be really anxious, and having my knitting, I remember just feeling my brain kind of just like shut, like finally it was like freaking out, like flashing, and just could not calm down. I was focused on everything around me, like that sense of heightened anxiety where you can hear every single sound around you, you can feel everything, the lights are too bright, everything's too loud, like that kind of just heightened hypervigilance feeling. Just focusing on my knitting, I remember just feeling my vision slowly kind of like come back and being able to just see what was in front of me again. And it is such an amazing tool for that reason to me, to have something to do with your hands that feels productive and can have that calming effect that quickly. Just being able to, look down, focus on something, and relax and just move your hands, think about the stitches in front of you. Just, I feel like it's a really good way to move your thinking kind of from that lizard brain back into your frontal lobe and be able to just kind of refocus and get out of fight or flight. Has been, it's just been a great tool for me in that way, to just have this kind of emergency, like if I'm feeling really anxious, I can whip out my knitting and it will help me calm down, even now in less severe situations, not on the verge or in the middle of a panic attack, being able to at work, like after a stressful call. I work from home, so after a stressful call or I get a stressful email, I will step away for 5-10 minutes and knit a little bit and just feel myself calm back down and kind of refocus. And I also think it's just like making that time for myself has been amazing at work specifically, because I remind myself that there's stuff outside of work and there's other things I care about and that I don't need to be always available, and that I can prioritize myself within my job. Like I'm there and I'm paid to be there and I want to perform well, but I also care about other things and I want to also live my life and just feel more like a rounded human rather than just a work bot. And knitting helps me do that during the day if I'm, feeling really stressed at work or whatever is stressing me out. Just being able to knit is so calming. And so I use it a lot in those high anxiety moments to calm down. But I also obviously don't just knit when I'm anxious. I knit all the time. And it also has just helped me with my mental health in a lot of other ways, like knitting instead of being on my phone all the time. I mentioned earlier that I'm the type of person that I can't just watch TV. I need to be doing something else. And that used to be being on my phone. And so I would watch TV and then I would be on my phone at the same time. I wouldn't really watch what was on the TV. I would just have it on as background noise and then be scrolling on Instagram or YouTube Shorts or, I don't know, TikTok when I had that. And just, it definitely was not good for me. Like during high school, specifically, I spent so much time on my phone. And part of that's being a teenager, but still spent so much time on my phone scrolling and looking at things constantly. And that was definitely when I was at my most anxious. And, that's also being a teenager, but still, like just constantly being on social media is proven to not be good for us. And I think that having a replacement has been the best thing for me to reduce my own social media usage. So, instead of just sitting in silence, which, a lot of people say, get off your phone, go do other things. But what are you supposed to do in your downtime? Like, my brain's used to having the stimulation, and just turning it off completely is not realistic. So being able to say, hey, brain, instead of scrolling, we're going to knit. And it's, also something that I enjoy doing and I'm excited about doing and can get lost in. That is so amazing that there is this alternative. So I really appreciate knitting for that and getting me off my phone, and just helps me. Like, there's a lot of good that comes from social media, and especially I love the knitting community online. Like, obviously I do. I'm filming a video for the knitting my knitting YouTube channel. I like social media because I post on social media, and I have a lot of friends I've met through knitting, and I want to keep up with people in my personal life as well through social media. There's a lot of good that comes from it, and I think especially in this kind of knitting space, there is a lot of good. There's a lot of amazing creators that I think talk about important things while knitting, talk about their mental health, the fact that someone is posting about, hey, knitting is therapy, what do you think of this term? And people are talking about it, and hear people talk about their own relationships with knitting is always just so great. And I think there's a lot of knitters out there that do that, or knitters that talk about having chronic illnesses, because there are a lot of knitters or crocheters, crafters in general, that do struggle with chronic illnesses, including myself. And having that community and having people that share about things that are affecting you and be able to connect in a way that, I don't have people around me that can really relate, is amazing. I love social media for a lot of those reasons, and I especially love the knitter social media. But I still want to limit my time on social media. I still think that no matter the intentions, like, your brain can't handle that, seeing that much content, knowing that many people. I've seen my own attention span impacted by it. I've seen my own self-confidence in comparison to others impacted by it. And it's just better for me to knit instead, focus on myself and focus on what's actually in my life in front of me, rather than spending all of my time looking at what other people are doing in the most curated, best way possible, and all of that. So I'm really appreciative of knitting, and I see the impact knitting has on my mental health by just the fact that I'm spending less time online and spending more time just in my own little world and appreciating what's in front of me. So I think that overall has been a huge impact on my mental health, just getting off my phone, and the fact that I knit all the time. I mentioned talking about heightened anxiety moments with work and being able to knit when I'm feeling really anxious at work to calm back down. But also, knitting has helped a lot with my work-life balance. I definitely have a little bit of workaholism in me, and I extend that to a lot of things in my life. Like, I mentioned earlier that I used to work 20 plus hours while in high school, and in college, pretty much all of college, I had a full-time job through. And when I graduated from college, I did really struggle with sticking to 40 hours a week of work. And I have struggled for a long time with being always available, because the industry I work in is global. And so I have a lot of colleagues in different time zones than I am. So it's not like everyone stops work at this time. It's kind of everyone's getting up at different times. So no matter what time it is for me, one of my coworkers is definitely working at that time, even on the weekends, because we work in Islamist countries. And so on Sundays, they're working. And so it's really hard to know that some of my coworkers are almost always working, and that at any time, one of them might send me an email, might send me a text, or not a text, but like a Teams chat, something like that. And for a while, I really struggled with giving into this always available feeling and wanting to be always there because someone was always working, someone always needed something. But with knitting, it helps a lot. There's still times where I need to check myself and be like, just turn off your phone, turn off notifications. And I've tried to set, snooze schedules on when I get notifications. And no one's demanding this from me at my work. Like, obviously, everyone wants everyone else to have their time off and their rest. But I don't know. It's my own workaholism that I've had to work really hard on to reduce and combat, to make sure that I am taking time fully away from work. And one of the best ways for me to actually really disconnect is to knit, because doing things on my phone, I have my work email on my phone, I have my Teams on my phone, like I can talk to any of my coworkers, I can see all my messages, and doing something off of a screen, even if it's like going on watching TV. I think the fact that I spend the majority of my life in front of a screen for my job, or not the majority, but for work, I'm on my computer all the time. That has associated most screens with work. And so even if I'm on my personal laptop, or I'm on my phone, or looking at the TV, like just being around screens reminds me of work and makes it harder for me to really disconnect. And again, like I work from home. I'm not leaving my house to do my job. So the room I'm in right now is also the room I work in. And so it can get kind of hard to feel disconnected when I'm in the same room. I'm staring at my work computer right now, and it makes it harder to feel that disconnection. But I think that knitting has really helped me with that and helps me establish more boundaries, because I get lost in it. And there's also always something I'd rather be doing, like with work. I mean, sometimes I enjoy my job. I like my job, but it is still a job, and it's not, relaxing, I'd say. And so knitting is something that I'd rather be doing. And so it's a really nice, low effort, low energy thing that I would rather be doing after a long day of work. And so it really does help me to actually disconnect, because I know a lot of people will want to leave the house, go do something, and I like doing that too, obviously, but I don't want to leave my house and go do something every night to get away from work. And so having knitting as something that I can just do and is right in front of me and doesn't take a lot of effort, but is something that I really enjoy, really does help me disconnect from work and not care if I'm getting messages or anything, because I'm enjoying doing something else and I'm allowed to do that. But it's still, low effort enough that I'll do it every night, and it just does really help me. So I'm really appreciative of knitting for that. And yeah, I think those are the main ways that I see knitting as improving my mental health. And talking about kind of the other side of that, there's not that many ways that knitting hurts my mental health, if any. But I will say that oftentimes I do get stressed out about knitting, especially when I'm at the point of a project like this, where I've finished everything that's kind of fun and exciting about a project, and I just have so much stockinette to do, or so much of the same thing to do. Sometimes then my knitting can kind of stress me out, just because I'm a monogamous knitter. I've tried in the past to have a few projects going at the same time, because I want, something that is going to be exciting at all times. But having multiple projects at the same time actually stresses me out so much and just makes me so anxious, because I then feel like my attention is split in a lot of different ways, and I'm always deciding like which project to prioritize, and I just want something right in front of me to just work on. And so well, just knowing like, oh my gosh, I have 100 more rows of stockinette in front of me and that's going to take me forever and that's really boring. Well, knowing that can cause me some stress because then I'm thinking about like, well, how can I make this manageable for myself? Like maybe let's try to do 10 rows every night, or like I'm at the easy part. Like I don't know, I struggle with projects when there's not an easy metric of progress or easy stopping points. Like the fact that there's just so much stock in it and ahead of me makes me want to split it up some way or power through it in one night, which is not healthy and also not possible. But it just kind of makes me feel a little bit stressed about the fact that I'm just going to be doing this for the next few days. That's also really relaxing. And when I don't do projects that just have miles of stockinette, at some point, I do end up kind of missing it and feeling stressed in another way because all of my projects take a lot of thought. And then I'm like, I don't want to sit down and knit this right now because I don't have the mental energy to think through like following a lace pattern or following a colorwork pattern. A lot of those do end up simple in my head as well, but there can be some stress in just when there's a lot ahead of me because I really don't like setting down my projects and picking up something else that feels more exciting, because then I feel kind of guilty about not finishing something and stressed about when I'm going to get around to it and finish it. And so I'm really a monogamous knitter, not because I think it's the better way to knit. Like, I think having multiple projects on the go sounds more fun, honestly. But for me, it's about the fact that I feel a lot of guilt and anxiety when I set a project down. And I'd like to work on that because then I also feel a lot of, it's not really, I wouldn't say it's anxiety, but I get a little bit stressed about just getting through a lot of stockinette or get less inspired by a knitting project when it is at this stage of just knitting down for, however long. I have 12 inches to do on this project. Well, that's the total from the arm. And I don't know, I probably have 4.5 maybe. So that's just a lot to do. And it just, I don't know, like it's still methodical. Like I love just knitting. It feels nice to just do, especially with these needles and this yarn. Like this is a really comfortable, nice feeling to just go around and around. But I also want there to be more, and that kind of makes me feel a little stressed sometimes. I don't know if this is relatable or not, or if it's just my own like work. I don't know. I don't know if this is workaholicism, but I've talked before in videos, I can't remember where, but you've maybe heard me say this about how I really am very driven by completing things and by just getting projects done, I guess. When I was a kid, I used to always assembly line drawings. Like I'd never make one unique drawing and just kind of have fun with it and finish something and then move on to something else. Like I would make the same drawing 5 or 6 times in a different way, and I would assembly line it. And so I used to do this thing where I'd call it stained glass, but essentially I'd take a Sharpie and I'd draw a bunch of little shapes all over a piece of paper so that they all overlapped. And then I'd take water soluble markers and I'd fill in all of the areas that I just colored with different markers. And then I would take a wet paper towel on top of that and put it over it so that it would get kind of wet and look more watercolory. And I would make tons and tons of those to the point where I made myself a template of the lines. So I copied and printed out a template of the lines, and then I would just color them in, and I would go in and I'd say, okay, I'm using my yellow, and I'd take like 6 of the templates that I had pre-printed out, ready for me to go. And I would fill in the yellow on all of them. And it would be slightly different for all of them, but I would use that color. And then I'd come in with the next color. And I'd go like that and kind of assembly line myself. And and then I would wet them all at the same time and try them all at the same time. And I've just always done that, where I like doing things in the most efficient and productive way, and I like doing a lot of production. And so for me, finishing something is really satisfying. And if there's just a lot of stockinette in front of me, for instance, I will try to break it up into these chunks that I can kind of assembly line to say like 10 a day, like 10 rows a day. We're going to do that. And then we're going to finish it by this time. And just, yeah, even for things that it should just be fun and pick it up when I'm working on it, set it down whenever. Like, that's the joy of a stockinette project in the round, is I can just pick it up, set it down. Like, this doesn't have a deadline. There's nothing associated that says I need to get this done by Friday. But in my head, I'm like, if this is not done by Friday, I'm a failure. Like, I need to finish this by Friday because I think I can, and I need to keep on track of doing the 10 rows a day. Not working towards a deadline, but I still, just for my own sanity, want it to be done and want to see measurably how I'm working towards that. And I want to stop doing that. I've obviously done it my entire life, and it has definitely bled into knitting. And so sometimes that can cause me some anxiety with knitting, where I'm making my own internal deadlines for no reason. There is no reason for me to do this except stressing myself out, and yet I do it anyways. And it's something that I've been working on for a long time, but still, just in my brain when I'm knitting, I'm thinking, okay, maybe I can do 10 rows a day. Okay, if I did 10 rows a day and I have 8 inches left, then that means I'll finish by next Sunday. Ooh, I don't like that it's next Sunday. That's really far away. Maybe I can up it. And, thinking about all the other knits, because I'm a monogamous knitter. And so if I want, like for this month, for instance, this is the first month in a while that I haven't had any sample knits. I do have a sample knit due in November that I'm already like, oh gosh, I should start that. The fact that I haven't started it is stressing me out. It's due in November. I have a month and a half to do this. It's a shawl. I have a month and a half. It's fine that I haven't started yet. But the fact that I haven't started, that is stressing me out. But anyways, this is the first month where I haven't had any sample knit deadlines for a while. I had a few in June or in July. I was traveling all June and trying to get a design that I made done in June. And so July I had 2 sample knits, and then August I had 1, and I was moving. And so a lot of more deadline knitting recently, but September I've been able to chill that out, but I've still made my own deadlines because I'm trying to make a pair of socks every month, and I'm a month behind as well. So I said at the beginning of the month that I want to make 2 pairs of socks this month, but it's already September 15th, and I am still just working on this, which I started on August 30th. So that's stressing me out because I want to get my 2 pairs of socks done, and then I also want to start the sample knit that I want to start the sample knit that I've agreed to, of course, but I also want to make a second sample of my own design and want to start that really soon so that I can get on testing and get that out, while it's still winter, if I decide to release the pattern. And so thinking through all of the things that I have ahead of me makes me really want to get this off the needles as soon as possible so I can start all those things. And that sucks because this is a hobby. This is, I am trying to release a sample or a design, and so I would charge for that design and I could get paid from that, but it's still primarily a hobby. I have a full-time job and don't want knitting to become my full-time job. And so, I want to make videos. It's kind of a hobby for me to make these videos, but I also do post them and do get paid by YouTube. Every once in a while, not that often, but every once in a while I get paid by YouTube for the views that I've gotten. All of that is partially business. And so it has some deadlines associated with it, and same with doing a sample knit for a yarn dyer. That's a hobby because I get to knit and I get to play with fun yarn. but it's also, I'm getting paid to do it. And so it creates a little bit of stress to try to balance this, like, oh, it's a hobby, I can do whatever, even when I'm working on, a fun 100%, this is someone else's pattern, this is yarn I purchased, there's no time stress in me getting this done. But the fact that I have in my queue things that are sample knits or are my designs that I want to test again, then stresses me out for every other knit I have in my pipe or in my queue, because even when I'm working on something for myself, I want it to be done quicker so that I can focus my time back on these deadline knits. And then when I'm working on the deadline knits, I want to get the deadline knits done because they're deadlines. Even if I have 2 months, 3 months to work on something, I'm still like stressing to get through a deadline knit. And that's just me. I've done that at school too, done that at work, where I always want to work harder than I need to and return things sooner than I need to. It's not necessarily perfectionist, it's more just like knowing that I have something due at some point makes me anxious and makes me just want to get it done immediately, even if I have more than enough time on it. Like, I'm kind of an opposite of a procrastinator in that sense, where I will rush to get something done as soon as I can and submit it 2 weeks early rather than wait and relax and take time. Like, I still kind of do the same feel the same rush and stress as a procrastinator does, trying to get something done by the deadline, but I do it like well before the deadline and just want it submitted just in case something happens. And it's the same with knitting and deadline knitting, and even when it's not external deadlines, like a sample knit or trying to get a design done so I can release it when it's still winter, it's, internal deadlines. If I set a goal for myself this year to make a pair of socks every month, and so now if I'm not doing that, I'm failing and it's stressful. Or this internal deadline of like, it still needs to be cool enough for me to, or warm enough for me to wear this t-shirt I'm working on, even though like it stays warm where I am until end of September. Like, it's still in the 90s right now. I have plenty of time to wear this. And even if the season does start changing, jackets exist. I can still wear this for a long time this season. It's fine if I don't finish it, when it's still technically summer, because I'll still get a lot of wear out of it, even if I layer with it. But in my head, I'm like, no, I have to get it done right now. Like, it needs to be done. Or just the fact that, I want to finish this before moving on to other things is making me just trying to stress finish this and like, oh, let's try to finish it by Wednesday. And just, come on, relax. It's fine. It's fine. So that's not necessarily something that knitting has done to me, or, something that has come out through knitting. It's just something that I've always seen in myself and continue to work on. But I do want to be honest about the fact that sometimes knitting does stress me out, and sometimes knitting is not therapy, because sometimes knitting feels like I'm on a production line in the 1800s just trying to keep up, And that's completely self-imposed, but I think that a lot of knitters will feel that way sometimes. There's definitely a pressure being on knitting Instagram and social media, seeing how quickly a lot of people get things done. And obviously you don't see the behind the scenes of how long they've actually been working on things. You just see like a bunch of finished objects from folks. But sometimes watching others' podcasts or seeing others' Instagrams, it can feel like, oh, I'm behind, I'm not knitting enough. Like, other people knit so much more than me. And I think that at times I've contributed to that, because I also recognize I am a pretty fast knitter. And so I'm really sorry if I've ever made you feel that way, viewer. That's never, my intention. I know that I knit a lot. And even me, sometimes I still feel like I'm not doing enough, especially lately where I've been working more or going on walks and just spending a little less time knitting. I feel anxious sometimes about how much others have done compared to me, and it can be anxiety inducing. And I have to remind myself, like, for a lot of people, this is their full-time job. Like, a lot of people survive off of their pattern sales. That is their livelihood. That is their complete job. And so their life is knitting, or not their full life, but their job is knitting, their hobby is knitting. They're going to get more done than me because I spend 40 hours a week plus at my desk where I'm not knitting that whole time. And I do these other hobbies, and that's okay. It's fine. But just, I don't know. It can be stressful to see what others are doing, and it can put some stress on my own crafting to try to get more done or get more out, or thinking about, oh, I have to film a podcast on October 6th, for instance, and so this better be done by October 6th because I don't want to show it as an unfinished object, or thinking through like, oh, I don't want just one finished object in my next podcast. I want more than that. And so just thinking that through and kind of giving myself anxiety through trying to create a lot in a short amount of time. And that's completely internal pressure. It's not like anyone's saying I don't have enough finished objects, or people aren't like saying my podcasts are boring if there's only one finished object, because there's still always lots to talk about in knitting. But it's just this internal pressure. And yeah, it's important to address, because there have been times where, like, I remember like a month ago when I was getting ready to move, or a little over a month ago at this point, but a little while ago, I was getting ready to move and packing everything. I was working and just had a live project or a proposal go live at work, where that takes a lot of time and a lot of effort at work. And then I had the sample knit to do, and I just was so stressed about knitting and work, and everything at once just felt so stressful. And the fact that I had these knitting deadlines, and I felt that before, of when I do have a lot of sample knits going on at the same time, having the stress, or even test knits, just having the stress of like, I have this deadline, I have this, and on its own it's fine, but it's just something else to think about in my brain, and another kind of task to keep track of, even if I'm enjoying doing it and I'm going to fully meet the deadline. It's just always something else to keep track of. Or even just, before I was traveling, I wanted to finish my Eva cardigan to bring on my trips with me. And just the stress of like, I'm trying to get ready for this trip, work-wise, personal life-wise, like spend time with my boyfriend before I leave town for basically a month. And then also, get ready work-wise for me to not really be at my computer for a month between all this travel. And then adding to that, like trying to finish a whip. It's stressful. It can be stressful. It can just be something additional for your brain to keep track of, which is not always ideal when you're already keeping track of a lot. And so it can add to my overwhelm. If I'm feeling very overwhelmed and I have projects that I'm trying to finish, or deadlines internally or externally, it just adds pressure sometimes. And so, that's always something to work through, but it's something to be mindful of with being overwhelmed and the relationship between knitting and mental health. Overall, I do think that's a very positive relationship, but it would be false to just talk about the positives, so wanted to also add those negatives here. Thanks for being here. Let me know what you think about knitting and mental health, how it relates for you. If you related to anything I said or disagree, I'd love to hear that, because I think it's always interesting to just hear others' opinions, and maybe it'll shape my own going forward, or will help me kind of change something about the way I'm knitting and how it impacts my mental health. So I'd love to hear it. Love to hear if this is relatable, fun, good. Just any thoughts you have, please let me know. Always interested. So here's how far I got. This was actually pretty good. Normally when I do a knit and chat, I get no knitting done, but look, it's like, that's like at least a centimeter, probably 1.5 centimeters, maybe even 2 centimeters. So almost an inch. Pretty proud of that for, I've been filming for about 50 minutes now. And yeah, thank you for being here. I will see you again next week. And until then, happy knitting. All right, bye.